Hey guys, this is Kayla. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've watched some of my videos before. Today we're going to do my monthly wrap-up for the month of May. I know it's a little bit late, but I read some pretty good books in May and I have a lot of things to say about them. So let's go ahead and dive into that. It has been a while since I sat in front of a camera, so if I seem like a weirdo, first of all, that is who I am. But second of all, it's because I have been not really filming. So it was a little weird getting this all set up, so hopefully the lighting's okay and I'm actually focused on me instead of my freaking shelf, because sometimes I do that. So anyway, let's go ahead and start out with my least favorite book of the month. This was actually a DNF, and that book is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. And this book, I liked it at first. I thought the premise was really interesting initially, like just based on the synopsis, which is why I picked it up. But it's supposed to be fantasy, and I would say it's very light fantasy in the beginning, as in I didn't get to the fantasy before I DNF'd it. I listened to 4 hours of it. It is a 17-hour audiobook, and it just really, I don't know, it just really fell short for me. I don't think I should have to listen to a quarter of a book, of a fantasy book, to get to the fantasy. And I know this isn't like a high fantasy book. I know that. I do. But it just, there was a lot of description in the writing, but not in a way that I liked. And this is, I like Robert Jordan's writing in Eye of the World. I like being able to visualize things the way he described it. I like Lord of the Rings and how Tolkien writes and describes things, because it seems intentional, whereas this was just kind of like, there's a part where they're describing like how this girl is like taking and removing paintbrushes from her hair, and it's just like her fingerless gloves. It just was very like, it just did not speak to me in any way. And the premise of it is this guy named Zachary, who is a student who's kind of like not that happy with his life, but he's sort of going through the motions and rereading his childhood favorites and playing video games. And I guess there's some sort of magical portal door situation. I don't know. I never got to the portals or the doors or whatever the fun magical element was, because it was taking too long to get there. So anyway, that was my first DNF. Moving on. The next two books I struggled to rank, but I ultimately decided to go with The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater in this next position. I thought this book was fun when I read it, but now, like, I read it early in the month, and looking back, I hardly remember it. And because it's so not memorable, I feel like a book needs to stand out in my mind. And this other book that I'll get to in just a second, I actually remember a lot more of and have a lot more thoughts on. And so because of that, I just felt like The Raven Boys, while enjoyable, and I understand why people like it, I feel like it's kind of bland. It's just, a lot of the things that are done in it are not unique. It is not something that stands out in my mind. Basically, the main character, one of the main characters, Blue Sergeant, if she kisses her true love, that person will die. And then, so you follow her around. She's from like a family of psychics and clairvoyants, and they can kind of like speak to the dead and ghosts. And there's this whole situation with that. And then they also run into these kids from Aglenby, which is like a rich kid school, and there's like a gang of kids, these 4 guys, the Raven Boys, and you know, whatever, there's a snarky one, there's the poor one, there's the, you know, gruff kind of angry one. It's just very stereotypical YA, and I did enjoy the writing, but to be honest, looking back, I don't know that I'll pick up the next book in this. I don't know, I feel like it was just kind of trite, like it just wasn't, it's just not memorable. It's not something that stands out in my mind, and I don't know that I'll continue with this series. 3 stars though, either way. Alright, so the next book that I was struggling to rank is The Court of Miracles by Kester Grant. This book is being sold as a crossover between Les Mis and Six of Crows, and I don't know that that is correct. I feel like it's more like Les Mis fan fiction, in that if you haven't watched or read Les Mis, you won't really understand a lot of the things that are going on in this book. That being said, the concept for this book is much more interesting. The writing in The Raven Boys is better. This writing is very juvenile, but the plot, and like the style of this book I think is more unique, which is why I ended up kind of ranking it a little bit higher. Also because I had a, you know, awakening to Les Mis this month, and I realized I was missing it in my life, and that I eventually am going to have to read the actual big old chunker by Victor Hugo, and I don't know, it really touched me in a way that I just loved it, and this book is the reason that I watched it. So I think also I have that connection with this book. So even though I think this book is not executed well, I think it has potential. I would love to see more classic novels done like this though, maybe following the storyline a little bit better, maybe having more diversity in it, or, you know, maybe not oppressing women, or like, you know, something like that, making it a little bit easier, more palatable for like a younger audience to get the actual story of a classic novel while reading a book that is geared toward them more, you know what I mean? I don't know, and especially if you add like a fantasy element, like, give it to me, you know what I mean? So I don't know, I just think that's a cool idea, and that's kind of where I stand with this. There's a like love square in this that seems really unnecessary. There's a lot of time jumping that just makes really no sense at all. It's really not explained very well, and the characters are not developed. I won't even say underdeveloped. It's basically non-existent. If you haven't read or watched Les Mis, you won't connect with anybody or really understand anything. I don't know. So there is that. So I'm pretty wishy-washy about both of these. I think I actually like Raven Boys more, but just based on all these other elements, I think I'm going to rank Court of Miracles just a little bit higher. But either way, they're both kind of average for me. Okay, next up, I read The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. I know, thank you, I did pick up something that wasn't fantasy this month. Bravo to me. I actually picked up 2 things that weren't fantasy this month, making up 20% of the books that I read. So thank you. Yes, yes. I will take all the applause. But The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna is a World War II novel that follows 2 sisters, Isabel and Vianne. And Isabel is... Both of these sisters are French citizens who are not Jewish, and it's basically right when the Nazis sort of roll into France and start setting up camp before anyone really knows like what the Nazi regime is about. So Isabel is a rebel basically. She just wants to help everybody. She refuses to just listen to the Nazis, do what they say, acknowledge that these people are coming over to take over her country, and she's angry. While Vianne is more complicit and complacent, and she just sort of lets the world happen around her and is like, eventually things will be okay, someone else will deal with it, I don't need to, until she has to deal with it, you know what I mean? A Nazi ends up moving into her house, and Isabel goes off to join the rebellion or whatever, and Vianne is stuck in their little town living in this house with a Nazi who... Here's my issue with this book. I think this is probably a 3-star book as well. I haven't rated it or reviewed it because I wanted to kind of process my thoughts about it, but the Nazi and Isabel have a strange sort of romantic vibe, and she's married. Her husband is in a prisoner of war camp in Germany held by Nazi soldiers. This guy's like being... You know, he's a fucking Nazi. Like, whether or not he's like a good person, he's still carrying out like his Nazi duties. And so I don't know, there's not a redemption for him either, really, okay? I just don't, I felt like it was problematic, and I did not enjoy her parts for the first like 3/4 of the book. I didn't like it. But Isabel's parts I did like, and of course I cried. It's a World War II book, but to be quite honest, for a World War II book, it's not like that sad. You know what I mean? Like, usually I pick up World War II books. I don't know why I reach for them. It's something that I enjoy, but usually they just straight up wreck me, and I did not feel like this one did that. Like, of course I cried. There's definitely some really sad moments. It's World War II, but it was just okay for me. Not that great. Next up, I read the Hunger Games trilogy. I love the Hunger Games. I gave them all 5 stars. I'm not going to review this. Just know that Haymitch is my favorite character, and every time I read these, I have a growing appreciation for Suzanne Collins' writing style, being so simple and yet still being able to portray these worlds and these characters so well. So either way, moving on from that, love the Hunger Games. So because I read the Hunger Games, I can presume that you can guess what I read next. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, the Hunger Games prequel, the controversial book of the year. God forbid someone writes about a villain and not about Haymitch. I'm so sorry. I enjoyed this book, okay? I know plenty of people are hating all over it, but to be quite frank, I liked it a lot. Did I love it? No. I might have loved it. I did not like the ending. And that deducted a freaking star for me because I felt the ending was very lackluster. It just was. And there's some things that I wanted more of that we didn't get. And so if I knew this was like a duology, I feel like I might have forgiven some of the things that were left out. But because I don't know if the story will go further, but either way, Coriolanus Snow is the character President Snow from the Hunger Games. He is an 18-year-old kid who is going to this school who is testing out being mentors in the 10th annual Hunger Games. The 10th annual Hunger Games are nothing like the 75th Hunger Games. There's no pomp. There's no reality show vibes to it. They're not. The Capitol is still like remembering what it was like to be in war and to have nothing. And a lot of people still are working through like the things that occurred to them during the war and trying to recover. And the Snow family is left with nothing, and so President Snow, Coriolanus, is trying to get back on top. And I honestly really like this book. I loved that the music was woven into it, just like in the first books. I liked that Lucy Gray, the tribute, is from District 12. I like that she's nothing like Katniss. I like that there's so many things that I really enjoyed about this book. I like that the writing was more grown up. I like that it was third person instead of first. It just felt more elevated, darker. Like, it felt like she wrote this for Hunger Games fans instead of like the same audience that she wrote for in 2008. And I also appreciated that. So either way, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was a great read. I don't understand all the hate it's getting. I hate that Goodreads lets people rate books before they're released also. This book had a 3.9 star rating before it was released, just saying. And most of the people were like, I hate that, it's President Snow. And it, like that irritates me. So moving on. I'm salty about this, as you can tell. Okay, so another Kristen Hanna book that I read that I loved this month was The Great Alone, and this book takes place in Alaska, which is where I live, which is why I wanted to read it this summer, because I'm leaving Alaska at the end of the year and I wanted to read the book that takes place in Alaska while I'm in Alaska, and it's fantastic. It follows a family in the 70s who have been kind of moving around. The dad was in the Vietnam War, he was a prisoner of war, and because of that he has a lot of problems mentally. He's an alcoholic, he's abusive, and they get left this little house, homestead essentially, in outside Homer, Alaska. And so the family picks up from the lower 48 and moves to Alaska, and that's where everything happens. This is a hard-hitting book, you guys. It is constant. Like, anytime you think there's a little bit of hope, Kristen Hanna is like, lights it up, okay? It's a hard-hitting book. It is hard to read, but it is beautiful. It is such a good book. The ending, once again, another ending that I did not enjoy. I thought the ending was too long. I thought there was a little bit too much happening at the end. But overall, man, definitely highly recommend. I cried constantly. Like, and we know I'm a baby, but good God, it was worth every tear. I just loved it. There's so many things happening in it. There's so many characters. It's just really tragic. It's hard to watch a family being abused and just the cycle of not being able to get out and like making all these excuses for the abuser and just accepting that this is your life. You know what I mean? Especially in an area that's so isolated, in a time when women weren't able to do a lot of things without a man's help. It was... I have goosebumps. I just loved it. Okay, and finally, my absolute favorite book this month was Red Rising by Pierce Brown. This is like an elevated version of the Hunger Games in a way. Not specifically, like, it's definitely different. Like, this book takes place on Mars. It is in the future. It is dystopian, and it follows a character named Darrow. Darrow is a low red, which is like the lowest class, and the low reds are obviously the lowest of the low for the red class. And there's a rebellion, of course, and so So Darrow is selected kind of because he's really intelligent and he's charismatic. They think that he could inspire people, so he's selected to kind of infiltrate the gold caste, which is the highest caste. And so he goes through this school and this training and gets sorted into like houses, but instead of like Hogwarts houses, it is Roman gods, and it's based on the traits that the Roman gods have, and there's leaders of each house that kind of go through like a draft essentially and draft all these recruits for their houses, and then they get sent to these castles, and they war against each other. Yeah, it's pretty awesome, okay? Like, it's pretty freaking awesome. I loved it so much. There is an audio for it. Obviously, I do not recommend that. I thought the accent was a little bit thick, and maybe it wouldn't bother you, but it was really hard for me to listen to and retain the information. Like, I kept having to go back and re-listen to it, but either way, I just really loved it. There's some parts that seem like Darrow keeps falling for the same things over and over, or like a little bit of repetitiveness as far as that goes, but to be quite frank, I thought this was a really fun and fast read, and I just loved it so much. So those are all the books I read in May. That's 9.5. So as far as the Hunger Games readathon goes, I finished 9 for that as well. Those prompts were all fit in. I just didn't feel like the need to go through and say which one was for which, but I finished 9 books for that, and then the half book is my DNF. I guess it's a quarter book, whatever. So yeah, I will be participating in Stormalong 2020. I've already made it a little bit into the Way of Kings. I think right under 200 pages or so I'm into it, and let me tell you guys, the Stormlight Archive is even better the second time. There are so many things that I missed the first time, or that you can't, I guess not miss, you just wouldn't see them because you don't know where the story's going and you don't understand what's happening when you get thrown into the mix. So either way, that's exciting. Alright you guys, well that is it. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe if you would be so kind. I'd truly appreciate it. I'll see you guys next time. Stay tuned, and there'll be more to come.